Experts began to look at it, and it was finally determined that the test was taken from the very end of the shroud.
What if one of history's greatest religious mysteries was no longer being investigated by theologians, but by geneticists, physicists, and forensic scientists? For centuries, the Shroud of Turin has fascinated believers and skeptics alike. A simple piece of linen bearing the image of a crucified man has sparked endless debate about its true origin. Was it a medieval forgery, an elaborate work of art, or an authentic relic connected to one of history's most influential figures? Now, groundbreaking scientific investigations have uncovered new evidence hidden within the fabric itself, revealing mysteries that may be even more astonishing than anyone imagined. The artifact that divided the world. For hundreds of years, the Shroud of Turin has stood at the center of one of the most intense and enduring debates in human history. Few artifacts have generated as much fascination, controversy, and investigation. To millions of Christians around the world, it is believed to be the burial cloth of Jesus Christ, bearing the miraculous imprint of the man who was crucified nearly 2,000 years ago. To skeptics, however, it represents something entirely different. Perhaps one of the most sophisticated religious forgeries ever created, designed to inspire faith during the Middle Ages. At first glance, the shroud appears surprisingly ordinary. It is simply a long piece of ancient linen cloth, yet across its surface is a faint, mysterious image of a man who appears to have suffered extreme physical trauma. The figure shows marks consistent with scourging, wounds on the wrists and feet, and injuries that many believe resemble the biblical descriptions of crucifixion. What makes the image so extraordinary is that it does not behave like any known work of art. Scientists and historians have searched for evidence of paint, ink, dyes, or pigments that might explain how the image was created. Yet no clear answer has ever emerged. There are no visible brushstrokes, no outlines drawn by an artist's hand. No known medieval technique has successfully reproduced every feature found on the cloth. For centuries, critics argued that the shroud originated during the Middle Ages. Some suggested that a highly skilled artist or craftsman created it as a devotional object intended to attract pilgrims. Others proposed that it may have been designed to strengthen religious belief during a time when relics were highly valued across Europe. These theories seemed reasonable, especially since the shroud first appeared in historical records during the 14th century. As a result, the debate remained locked between two opposing camps. On one side stood those who viewed the cloth as a sacred relic connected to one of history's most important religious figures. On the other side were skeptics who considered it a remarkable but ultimately human creation. For generations, neither side could produce enough evidence to convince the other. Then everything began to change. The arrival of modern science transformed the investigation completely. Researchers stopped looking at the shroud solely through the lens of faith or tradition. Instead, they began treating it as forensic evidence from an ancient mystery waiting to be solved. Using advanced technologies unavailable to previous generations, scientists launched some of the most detailed examinations ever conducted on a historical artifact. Spectroscopy was used to analyze the chemical composition of the fibers. Genetic sequencing searched for biological traces hidden within the cloth. X-ray imaging examined microscopic structures, while forensic blood analysis investigated the stains found on the linen. Scientists expected the tests to provide straightforward answers. Instead, the results raised even more questions. Evidence emerged that challenged long-standing assumptions from both believers and skeptics alike. Rather than settling the debate, modern research revealed a mystery far more complex than anyone had imagined. The Shroud of Turin was no longer viewed simply as an ancient cloth. It had become one of the most intriguing scientific puzzles in the world, and the search for answers was only beginning. The photograph that changed everything. One of the most important turning points in the history of the Shroud of Turin occurred on May 28, 1898, when a discovery made by an amateur photographer transformed the mystery forever. Before that moment, the shroud was already a subject of debate among religious leaders, historians, and skeptics. However, no one could have predicted that a simple photograph would reveal something so unexpected that it would challenge both science and common sense. The man at the center of this discovery was a lawyer and amateur photographer named Secondo Pia. During a public exhibition of the shroud in Turin, Italy, he received special permission to photograph the relic. Today, taking a photograph is as simple as pressing a button on a smartphone. But in 1898, photography was a complicated and demanding process. Large cameras, fragile glass plates, long exposure times, and careful lighting were all required to capture a single image. Inside the cathedral, Pia carefully positioned his equipment and spent hours preparing for the photographs. Using powerful lights and painstaking precision, he captured several images of the cloth. At the time, he had no reason to expect anything unusual. His goal was simply to document the famous relic. Later that evening, Pia returned to his darkroom to develop the glass negatives. As the image slowly emerged through the chemicals, he witnessed something that left him stunned. According to his own account, he was so shocked that he nearly dropped the photographic plate. Appearing before him was a remarkably detailed human face. The image visible on the cloth itself had always appeared faint and difficult to interpret. Yet on the photographic negative, the face became strikingly clear. Features that were barely visible to the naked eye suddenly emerged in extraordinary detail. The face showed closed eyes, a beard, a damaged nose, bruises, and signs of severe suffering. For the first time, people could clearly see the figure hidden within the linen. What made the discovery so extraordinary was that the negative image appeared more realistic than the image on the cloth itself. Normally, photography reverses light and dark areas. A photographic negative typically looks unnatural until it is converted into a positive image, but the shroud seemed to work in the opposite way. The image on the cloth already behaved like a photographic negative. When photographed, it transformed into what looked like a positive photograph of a real human being. This revelation stunned both believers and skeptics alike. If the cloth had truly been created during the Middle Ages, how could its creator have produced an image that functioned like a photographic negative centuries before photography was invented? The concept simply did not fit comfortably into any known artistic tradition. As scientists continued studying the shroud throughout the 20th century, the mystery deepened even further. Researchers using advanced image processing technology discovered that the image contains three-dimensional information. Unlike a painting or drawing, variations in the image's brightness appear to correspond to the distance between the cloth and the body it covered. No known medieval artwork possesses this characteristic. Paintings are flat representations, but the shroud seemed to preserve depth information within the image itself. Suddenly, many researchers began viewing the shroud differently. It no longer resembled a painting, a sketch, or even a traditional work of art. Instead, it appeared more like the record of an event, an image somehow captured in a way that modern science still struggles to fully explain. More than a century after Secondo Pia's discovery, the photograph that shocked the world continues to be one of the strongest and most puzzling pieces of evidence in the mystery of the Shroud of Turin. The DNA discovery that shocked researchers. The next major breakthrough in the investigation of the Shroud of Turin came in 2015, when scientists turned their attention to something almost invisible to the naked eye: microscopic particles trapped deep within the ancient linen fibers. While previous studies had focused on the image, bloodstains, and chemical composition of the cloth, researchers now wanted to examine the tiny biological traces that had accumulated over centuries. What they discovered would add yet another layer to one of history's most enduring mysteries. A team of researchers associated with the University of Padua carefully collected samples of dust, pollen, and biological material preserved within the threads of the shroud. These microscopic particles had become embedded in the fabric over hundreds and perhaps even thousands of years. Although tiny, they contained valuable information about the people and environments that had come into contact with the cloth throughout its history. Using advanced next-generation DNA sequencing technology, scientists analyzed these genetic traces in unprecedented detail. This method allowed researchers to identify fragments of DNA from plants, microorganisms, and humans that had been left behind on the cloth over time. The goal was simple: determine whether the biological evidence could reveal clues about the shroud's origin and journey through history. Initially, researchers expected relatively straightforward results. If the shroud was merely a medieval artifact created and displayed in Europe, the majority of the DNA should have originated from European populations. Likewise, if the cloth came exclusively from the Middle East and remained largely confined to that region, scientists anticipated finding genetic signatures associated primarily with Middle Eastern populations. What they found, however, was far more complicated. The DNA evidence revealed an astonishingly diverse mixture of genetic material linked to populations from multiple regions of the world. Alongside genetic markers associated with the Middle East, researchers discovered traces connected to various parts of Europe, North Africa, India, and even East Asia. The results immediately raised new questions. How could a single piece of cloth contain biological traces from so many distant regions? The findings puzzled researchers because the diversity was far greater than many had expected. Rather than pointing toward a simple origin story, the evidence suggested a far more complex history. One possibility was that the shroud had traveled extensively over many centuries, passing through numerous countries and cultures. Another explanation was that countless pilgrims, clergy, merchants, and visitors from different parts of the world had come into contact with the cloth throughout its existence. Either scenario pointed to an artifact with a remarkably long and eventful journey. Importantly, the DNA findings did not provide definitive proof regarding whether the shroud was authentic or a forgery. However, they did challenge overly simplistic explanations. The biological evidence suggested that the cloth had been exposed to an extraordinary variety of human populations over a prolonged period of time. This made it increasingly difficult to view the shroud as merely a localized medieval creation with a short history. As researchers continued analyzing the results, some began referring to the shroud as a biological archive, like a historical document written not with ink, but with microscopic traces of life. The cloth appeared to preserve evidence of centuries of human contact. Every person who touched it, carried it, displayed it, or venerated it may have left behind tiny fragments of their existence. In this sense, the Shroud of Turin became more than a religious relic or scientific mystery. It became a silent witness to generations of history, carrying within its fibers a record of countless human encounters stretching across continents and centuries. Following the ancient journey. The DNA discoveries made in 2015 did more than reveal a surprising mixture of genetic material from around the world. They also prompted researchers and historians to take a fresh look at ancient records, traditions, and legends concerning the possible travels of the Shroud of Turin. If the cloth truly contained traces linked to populations from Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, India, and East Asia, then perhaps its history was far more extensive than previously imagined. One of the most intriguing theories involves an ancient relic known as the Mandilion. According to historical traditions, the Mandilion was a sacred image believed to bear the likeness of Jesus Christ. While historians continue to debate whether the Mandilion and the Shroud of Turin are connected, some researchers believe they may have been the same object or closely related artifacts. If this theory is correct, the journey of the shroud may stretch back much further than the medieval period. The proposed route begins in Jerusalem, the city where many believe the cloth first originated. Jerusalem was one of the most important religious centers of the ancient world, attracting visitors from across the Roman Empire and beyond. If the cloth was preserved there in the early centuries after Christ, it would have already been exposed to people from many different regions. According to tradition, the relic later found its way to the ancient city of Edessa, located in what is now modern-day Turkey. At the time, Edessa was one of the great crossroads of the ancient Silk Road network. Merchants carrying silk, spices, precious stones, and other goods regularly passed through the city. Travelers from Europe, Persia, India, and distant parts of Asia mingled within its markets and streets. Diplomats, soldiers, religious leaders, and pilgrims also moved through the region, making it a hub of cultural exchange. If the relic remained in Edessa for centuries, it could have accumulated microscopic traces from countless visitors. Every touch, every breath, and every interaction may have left behind tiny fragments of DNA that became embedded within the fabric. The journey may not have ended there. Historical accounts suggest the relic was eventually transferred to Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire. During its height, Constantinople was one of the largest and most diverse cities on Earth. Positioned between Europe and Asia, it served as a meeting place for people from across the known world. Traders from Africa, merchants from Asia, pilgrims from the Holy Land, and travelers from Europe all passed through its gates. For centuries, relics displayed in Constantinople attracted enormous crowds. If the shroud was among them, thousands of individuals could have come into contact with the cloth over generations. This possibility offers a compelling explanation for the extraordinary mixture of genetic signatures discovered during modern testing. Rather than viewing the DNA findings as a confusing anomaly, some researchers began seeing them as a kind of historical roadmap. The diverse genetic evidence appeared consistent with an artifact that had traveled through multiple civilizations and been exposed to people from many different cultures over hundreds of years. While the DNA evidence does not prove the shroud's authenticity, it does suggest a remarkably complex history. The cloth appears less like a simple medieval object and more like a silent witness to centuries of human movement, trade, faith, and cultural exchange. Hidden within its fibers may be an invisible record of countless encounters, preserving traces of people whose lives intersected with one of history's most mysterious artifacts: blood, pollen, and the unanswered questions. DNA. Evidence was not the only scientific discovery attracting attention during the investigation of the Shroud of Turin. Researchers also turned their focus to another tiny but potentially significant source of information: pollen trapped within the linen fibers. Although invisible to most people, pollen grains can act as historical clues, revealing where an object may have traveled and what environments it may have encountered throughout its existence. Scientists carefully examined samples taken from the cloth and identified dozens of plant species from various regions of the world. Among the discoveries were pollen grains linked to plants native to the Middle East. This finding immediately caught the attention of researchers because it appeared consistent with traditions placing the shroud's origins in the regions surrounding Jerusalem. Some of the most intriguing pollen samples were traced to plants found specifically in and around the Jerusalem area. While pollen alone cannot prove where the cloth originated, the presence of these species added another piece to the growing puzzle. The findings suggested that at some point in its history, the shroud may have been exposed to environments associated with the Holy Land. One discovery generated particular interest among researchers. Scientists identified unusually high concentrations of pollen from a thorny plant known as Gundelia tournefortii. This plant grows throughout parts of the Middle East and has long attracted attention because of its thorn-covered branches. Some researchers suggested that it closely resembles the type of plant that could have been used in the creation of a crown of thorns. Although this connection remains debated, the discovery fueled renewed interest in the possibility that the cloth may have had links to events described in the New Testament. For believers, the pollen evidence appeared to support traditions surrounding the shroud. For skeptics, however, it represented another clue that required careful analysis rather than a definitive conclusion. At the same time, blood analysis revealed additional surprises. Advanced forensic testing identified the presence of human blood on the cloth. Researchers examined chemical compounds associated with the stains and found markers often linked to severe physical trauma, dehydration, and extreme physiological stress. Some studies suggested the blood contained substances that are commonly elevated in individuals who have suffered intense pain or significant bodily injury. Researchers also identified chemical signatures that appeared consistent with someone experiencing profound suffering before death. While these findings could not identify the individual involved, they added another layer of complexity to the investigation. Then there was the image itself, the feature that has puzzled scientists for more than a century. Despite decades of research using increasingly sophisticated technology, no one has been able to fully explain how the image formed. Scientists have determined that the discoloration exists only on the outermost fibers of the cloth. It does not penetrate deeply into the threads as paint, ink, or dyes typically would. Even more remarkable, no traces of pigments have been found that can account for the image's unique characteristics. Modern researchers have attempted to recreate the image using a variety of techniques, but none have successfully duplicated all of its features. Even with today's advanced technology, the process remains elusive. As a result, the central mystery of the Shroud of Turin remains unsolved. Every new discovery seems to answer one question while creating several more. From pollen and blood evidence to DNA analysis and the unexplained image itself, the Shroud continues to challenge researchers. The deeper scientists investigate, the more complex and fascinating the mystery becomes. After more than a century of investigation, the Shroud of Turin remains one of history's greatest mysteries. DNA, pollen, blood evidence, and advanced imaging have revealed fascinating clues, yet no definitive answers. Is it an authentic relic or an unexplained phenomenon? The debate continues. Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more fascinating mysteries and discoveries from around the world.